You fool! Warren is dead. UNHUMAN. 5 encounters with supernatural beings. The Thing from the Barrens by Jim Kjelgaard. I, George Mallory, graduate geologist, could only guess about the thing that came from the Barrens. I saw the horrible outrages it committed, but never the thing itself. Pug Davenport saw it. Now, his head literally torn from his body, Pug lies in the cemetery at North City. His should be a world-honored grave. Pug might have saved all humanity, and certainly saved the 500 people who made their homes in North City. But hear the story. I told myself that I did not know why I was staying in North City. Farthest North Metropolis, we called ourselves, after the Blanding Corporation built our city, peopled it, and then abandoned everything when the radium ore petered out. I could have gone when Blanding quit, collected my salary, and taken a job in Russia. But I didn't go, and our so-called metropolis of 500 people did not fold either. Some left, but others drifted in to take their places, and the population remained static. I lived because I had an independent income. Others did whatever there was to do. Pete Gallagher set up his store. Joe Urschel came along with his saloon. A few men did odd jobs, and most of the remaining 300 adult males went into the Barrens to trap. That was a hard life. The trappers would be gone for weeks and sometimes months with no intercourse whatever with other human beings. But they brought in plenty of white foxes, ermine, caribou hides, wolf pelts, fisher, and wolverines. Though I often went into the Barrens to hunt caribou and wolves, I did no trapping. Frankly, I lacked the hardihood to start out with a few dogs and a 3-month supply of grub to spend a 3-month-long night facing the lashing gales and everything else that could roar across the winter-bound Arctic. Then I did not need the money. It was a dull life, but I had never intended to make it a permanent one. I read my books and imported new ones to keep abreast of developments in my own field. But when I told myself that I did not know why I was staying in North City, it was a lie, because I did know. I stayed because of Marcia Davenport. That's right, a girl. Ask me why, and I cannot answer you. I had dined and danced with what supposedly are the most beautiful and charming women in the world, those found in the salons of New York, Paris, Santiago, Moscow, and I was madly in love with the little daughter of a fox trapper, a girl so devoted to her drunken and worthless father that the most she had ever given me was a friendly smile and a kind word. But I could neither help myself nor leave North City without her, and if Pug Davenport had taken his daughter and gone to the North Pole, I would have followed and built my igloo as close to theirs as possible. It was that way. Marcia and Pug had blown into North City with the first settlers Blanding had sent in. Pug was a wizened little man with a crosshatch of red veins hopelessly netting his features. He was supposed to be an explosives expert, but I suspect that back in what must have been a very checkered career, he had been an expert on anything you'd want to name, including safe-blowing and larceny. When Blanding pulled out, Pug stayed in the house they gave him and went in for fox trapping. Marcia? How can I tell you about her? Does it mean anything to say that she was a girl, almost 20 years old, beautiful, tall and lithe, with raven hair through which shone coppery overtones? That doesn't express it. All I can say is that what happens to maybe one man in a million had happened to me. I knew that I could never go anywhere unless she went with me. To have her as my wife would be the consummation of everything. If I could not have her, to be near her was second choice. But all during the 20 months since they had come to North City, Marcia's time had been given to Pug. She took him home when he was drunk, which was whenever he had any money. She nursed him through his hangovers, and when he was home spent all her time making for him the things he liked. When he was out on the Barrens, she worried about him. That little, drunken, worthless father of hers had woven such a spell about her that she seemed unable to think of another man. But yet she must think of other men. She was young, alive, human. Some day I hoped she would break the shell she had built around herself and let me in. That was the day I lived for. Meanwhile, I had danced with her a few times, and when Pug was out on the Barrens, I could go see her once in a while. That was what kept me hoping. The fox trappers had been out on their lines for 6 weeks now, and the half-light of winter had blanketed North City for 2 when I stepped out of my house into the street. There was not much snow. Farther south they get more of that than we do, and most of what falls here is blown away by the wind. That had been from the east for the past 20 days, and there were deep drifts along the eastern walls of all the houses. I had intended to go down and see Marcia when I dimly made out a dog team lying in front of Joe Urschel's saloon. As soon as I was close enough, I saw that it was Pug Davenport's team. That was a surprise. In spite of his habits, Pug is tough and hard, and usually stays out on the Barrens as long as anybody. This time, I figured, his thirst must have become unbearable. Evidently, he had just blown in, and Marcia didn't know he was here. But she would appreciate somebody's giving him a hand, and I went into Urschel's. Urschel had his own power plant. Every spring, the Nanook, North City's supply ship, brought him 20 50-gallon drums of gasoline to run it. I blinked in the unaccustomed glare of electric lights and looked at the bar. 2 of North City's winter residents, Moosehide Allen and Al Pettigrew, were hanging over it. Urschel would have starved if he depended on winter trade. His big killing was made when the fox trappers came back. Furs were currency, and he was getting rich. Now there was a great pile of white fox furs, bigger and silkier than I had ever seen before, on one end of the bar. I stepped up. "What'll you have, George?" Urschel asked. "Make it Scotch." I fingered the drink he poured and looked at the pile of foxes. A white fox is a little thing. Some of them aren't much bigger than cats, but those pelts were nearly wolf-size, and yet definitely they were foxes. Pug Davenport, somewhere out on those lonely Barrens, had found a breed of foxes the like of which man had never seen before. Don't smile at that. Spread a map of the North American continent before you. From Key West, Florida to Point Barrow, Alaska, you cannot find an unnamed place. You can then understand why cartographers and even some explorers have declared the world an open book with no new frontiers. Actually, nothing could be farther from the truth. Even though it takes you only 1/10 of a second to move your pointing finger from one named place to the other, it might take you 100 days to walk between those same places. That's what we had around North City. Men had gone into the Barrens, but not into all of them. Even in thickly populated states, there are still places where no man has set foot. A lot of things that we never dreamed existed are yet going to be found right in our own backyards. I looked at the pelts again, noted their size and texture. Ordinarily, it pays to give strict attention to your own business in North City, but I asked Urschel, "Where'd you get 'em?" "Pug Davenport brought 'em in. Said I should send half the money from down to Marcia, and he'd drink up the rest." "Wow, you should be able to drink until July." Urschel looked at me, his eyes hard. "He will be." "No offense meant," I told him. "Give me another drink." I took the drink he poured and backed against the bar to look around the unlighted back end of the room. Pug Davenport sat at a corner table, the darkest and most inaccessible one he could find, with a bottle of whiskey before him. As I looked, he tilted the bottle to his mouth and drained out a teacupful. I waited a minute. Pug can be ugly when he's drunk. Then took my drink and walked over to him. "Hello, Pug," I said. He looked at me and shrank as far as he could down into his chair, his trembling hand straight out to grasp my sleeve. "George," he said unsteadily. "Sit close to me, George." He pulled a chair around and me down on it. Again he raised the bottle, took a drink that would have floored an ordinary man, and his right hand took a firm grip on my left arm. I frowned. There was something here that should not be. I had known Pug Davenport to be almost anything except afraid. He went farther out on the Barrens than anyone else and laughed at those who dared not go with him. Always he had been ready to face anything. But now, both from the way he gripped my arm and in the way his eyes met mine, I knew that he was terrified. I told myself that he was probably in the first stages of the DTs, but when I moved, he whispered again, "George, don't leave me alone." For a second, I don't know why, I was very disturbed, but I fought for a grip on myself and tried to talk him out of it. "You certainly brought in a wonderful catch of foxes." I tried to be casual. "Where'd you get 'em?" He looked at me, staring as though he hadn't the least idea of what I was talking about, and let his glance rove to the pile of furs on the bar. For a full minute, he didn't say anything. Then he shuddered violently. "It's the duckfoot," he whimpered. "The duckfoot and the stick. You should see what it done to Matt Brazil." "What duckfoot and what stick, and what did it do to Matt Brazil?" Pug stared into space. "I tried to shake it off," he whispered. "I tried to. The trees were all green there, big tall trees. That's where the foxes lived. I tried to shake it off, but it followed me. It caught Matt Brazil, and you should see what it done to him. It will come here." That was nonsense. In the first place, there aren't any trees in the Arctic. In the second place, this talk of a duckfoot and a stick doing something terrible to Matt Brazil, another North City fox trapper, was just the inane ramblings of a trapper who had too much to drink. As for the duckfoot and the stick following Pug to North City, Marcia was needed here. I stood up, put my hand on Pug's shoulder, and shook him. He blinked into drunken attention. "Pug," I said clearly, "sit right where you are. No duckfoot and stick can get you in here. The door's shut." A pathetic expression of hope and relief crossed his eyes. He mumbled something that I did not hear. "I'm going to get Marcia," I said. "We'll keep you safe from the duckfoot and the stick. Don't move until I come back." I pulled my parka about me and went back into the wind-blasted street. Pug's 4 huskies were stretched in their traces, sleeping, and they raised indifferent heads when I came out. I had seen them before, but only now did I notice how thin and worn they were, and the blood that stained the snow beneath their paws. For a moment I looked uneasily at them. Wherever he had come from, Pug had certainly given his dogs a lot of punishment. That was silly. There couldn't be any truth in the wild, disconnected story he had told. Tall green trees, foxes big as wolves, and a duckfoot and a stick that had done something terrible to Matt Brazil. Only the foxes were real, and exactly where had Pug Davenport taken those pelts? Certainly no other man had ever seen foxes like them. Somewhere back in those god-forsaken barrens, Pug might even have found trees. But the duckfoot and the stick... I broke into a run. The darkness seemed unreal, full of moving things. Deliberately, I slowed to a walk. A man had to keep his head, and there was nothing with which he could not cope as long as he let nothing excite him. Whatever Pug Davenport had seen on the Barrens... Cut it out, I told myself. He didn't see anything. I swerved to Marcia Davenport's lamp-lighted house and knocked on the door. Marcia opened it, and a gust of wind blew sugar-like snow across the kitchen floor. I slipped inside, shut the door behind me, and let my hungry eyes feast on her. Somehow the loveliest pictures my mind ever drew were never quite so lovely as she herself, and always when I was near her, I wondered why she should even think of marrying me or any other man. A god would be a more fitting mate for Marcia Davenport. She smiled. Hello, George. Take off your parka. I stood against the door, the parka swinging about my knees. For a second I groped for words, wondering how to break gently to Marcia the news that Pug was back and having a real bender up at Urschel's. Common sense came to my rescue. In a good many ways, Marcia was exactly like Pug, not afraid of much and seldom hesitating to tackle anything. Pug's back, I told her. She nodded, grasping at once everything I meant. Is he bad? She asked quietly. Quite bad. You'd better come. All right, just a minute. She went into another room, and when she came out, she was wearing the exquisite fawnskin parka that Pug himself had made for her. Marcia smiled at me and grasped my elbow reassuringly. I groped happily beside her, thoroughly ashamed now of my own near panic. Somehow it seemed that nothing could ever go wrong as long as Marcia was near. There was something deep inside her that seemed incapable of being moved or even ruffled by anything from the outside. A quiet strength. Whatever came, Marcia could face and cope with it. And right at that moment, I thought more strongly than ever that this girl beside me represented not only the highest type of womanhood, but the highest of humanity. Together we walked up the street, Marcia bending her head against the wind and holding tight to my elbow to steady herself. We were nearly opposite Urschel's when I had an almost irresistible impulse to cross to the other side of the street. There seemed to be something over there overwhelmingly magnetic, something that I could not see but only feel. Marcia was one step ahead of me, pulling me by the arm and looking questioningly up into my face. Come on, she made herself heard above the steady roar of the wind. I must go over there. I took another step forward and stopped in my tracks. Deliberately, forcefully fighting some mighty summons that pulled me forward, I took 2 steps backward, and the pressure lessened slightly. A cold hand seemed to be stroking my spine, a clammy breath pouring down my neck. I recognized those symptoms as the awakening of fear, terror such as that which was reflected so plainly in Pug Davenport's face. I tried to summon reason to my aid, but all I could be sure of was that, though I did not know what lay on the other side of the street, I did know that it was something to be very much afraid of. Come on, I shouted. Pug's in the saloon. But I must go across the street. Come on, I screamed, fighting for every inch, doing my utmost to resist the powerful impulse that said I must cross the street. I half dragged her toward the saloon. When we had gone 10 feet farther, we seemed to pass out of the orbit of whatever had tried to influence us. So strong had been my pressure on Marcia's arm that immediately we both stumbled into the snow. We arose and brushed ourselves off. Marcia, puzzled, turned around. I don't know why, she said, but I had the strangest feeling back there that I must cross the street. Nonsense, I told her. Come on. We reached the saloon. Joe Urschel had no sign in front of his establishment, but he did keep an electric fan turned on the window before the bar in winter, so that frost would not cloud it and passers-by could readily see a place of refreshment. I glanced up at that window to see the faces of Al Pettigrew and Moose-eyed Allen plastered against it. Their eyes were staring, their mouths agape. Plainly, they had had some terrific surprise or shock. Careful to swing Marcia the other way when we entered, I pointed to the back end of the room. Pug's there, I said. She hurried back, and I approached the 2 men who were staring out the window. What's wrong? I asked. Urschel, Al Pettigrew ejaculated. What's the matter with Urschel? He floated away. What? That's right, Moosehide said. He was going over to Pete Gallagher's for a set of hinges, but as soon as he got across the street, he turned and went down it right to that little black stick laying there. He stood there a minute or more, rocking back and forth and like to fall. Then he floated away. His legs was 2 feet off the ground. You're crazy. George, I ain't crazy and I ain't drunk. Moosehide said angrily. Herschel's parka was wrinkled, like a rabbit's fur when a wolf's hauling it. Nothing carried him. He floated. Something seemed to pervade the room, a cold and fear-inspiring presence that had no shape or form, but yet had definite being. I turned around to see Marcia bent over her father, stroking his temple with her hand, and swing the bottle of whiskey behind her. Pug groped for it like a pleading child, and Marcia permitted him a short drink. Pug fell across the table, hopelessly drunk, and Marcia sat down opposite him. I walked back. How is he? He'll be all right, George. Marcia smiled at me, and I felt weak all over. Did he tell you anything? He had some story about a duckfoot and a stick, and said that I must keep away from the stick or I'd never get away. I think he's more bushed out than drunk. Yes, that's it, I agreed. He's bushed out. That's a term we apply to anybody who's been out in the Barrens too long, and has gone a little crazy as a consequence. Association with others generally fixes them up, but I knew that Pug Davenport was not bushed out. And now I knew also that wherever he had caught those foxes, he had also met some unreal, inhuman thing about which the whiskey that fogged his brain prevented his telling us. Doubtless the surprise had been mutual, but whatever the monster was, it had followed Pug back to North City and was preying on human beings. I walked to the front of the saloon and looked thoughtfully at Herschel's 30-06 hanging on a rack of caribou horns over the bar. Al Pettigrew sidled down to me. What do you suppose it is, Doc? He asked. Nothing at all, Al. By the way, what became of Pug's dog team? They took off down the street, sled and all, howling like banshees. Doc, there's something out there. Nonsense, I snapped, anything to avoid a panic. What could be out there? You ain't fooling me, Al said suddenly. I seen it. What did you see? Nothing. There you are. Don't go starting crazy rumors. I'm going out there. I'm staying here, Al mumbled. Keep the door locked if you're afraid. I aim to. I'll go with you, Moosehide offered. No thanks, you needn't. I took Herschel's big 30-06 from the rack and stepped out on the porch. My intention was to stand there and blast the stick with a soft-nosed bullet from the gun. But when I looked, the stick was not there, nor was there any indication of the powerful force that had tried to drag Marcia and myself across the street. Carefully, the gun leveled, I walked to where the stick had been. A strange, musty odor, vaguely like that of an aroused ermine, pervaded the air. Slowly, a step at a time, I went forward. The snow was blowing down the street, a fine mist of hard flakes, but it had blown over the place where the stick had lain, and I stopped short. Just ahead of me were half a dozen long, triangular tracks, almost exactly like those that might be left by a duck walking in the mud. But these tracks were longer than my own and proportionately wide. I gasped and raised the rifle for something to shoot at, but there was nothing, only the musty odor and the half-dozen tracks that were lost in snow-blown nothingness. Slowly I turned around, saw Sweet Thomas's daughter step out of her house at the end of the street. A slim girl, with her father's coloring and her mother's patient acceptance of whatever came. Lorna turned suddenly and walked to the other side of the street. She stopped short, swaying back and forth, coming dangerously near falling, but always rising again. It was then that I saw the black stick directly between her feet. I yelled and ran as fast as I could, but before I was able to cover half the distance, I saw Lorna Thomas rise in the air. Her parka was wrinkled, as though something had hold of her there. The little black stick was on the other side, floating through the air about 3 feet from the ground. I flung myself to one knee and leveled the rifle, but at once the futility of my own position became apparent. There was nothing to shoot at, nothing except the dangling girl and the little black stick. I sighted squarely between them and pressed the trigger. A hollow, chuckling sound rose high above the seething wind and floated back to me. Whatever carried Lorna Thomas broke into a run so swift that I was unable to keep them in sight. I shot again and again, and ran as fast as I could, but all I found was the line of huge duck tracks that again faded into wind-blown snow. I was terribly shaken when I got back to the saloon. For a few seconds, wild hysteria threatened. I grabbed a bottle, took a long pull, and slammed the bottle down on the bar. Al Pettigrew sidled up to me. "I told you," he leered. "There is something out there, ain't there?" That, more than anything else, sobered me. Al Pettigrew was the sort of nameless spawn, product of a father who had never seen him and a mother who had never wanted him, that you'll find in the North or anywhere else. He had a weak and flabby face in which abject terror lived. I, product of a high-class home and the finest scientific training man can provide, was supposed to be just a little better than that. "Yes," I snapped. "There is something. Now shut up." Again, I tried to bring reason to my aid, calling up and rejecting every scientific rule and theorem I had ever heard of, and inventing a few on the spot. But nothing applied. There was no precedent for this. All I knew was that a monster had come among us, a monster with a trap that held people helpless. The trap was easier to figure out. Doubtless it was some sort of metal with a very strong magnetic attraction for living flesh. Neogluents had properties similar to that, and probably this was some variety of such a metal. The creature that bore it must have form and substance, but was of a pigmentation that could not be discerned by the human eye. Certainly every resident of North City was doomed, unless we could find a way to stop it. But how can you take action against that which you cannot see? Now that the thing had discovered human haunts, when it was finished with North City, it had only to go south. Then I walked back to where Marcia was still sitting beside the drunken pug. Now the Arctic day had changed to the deeper gloom of night, and the lights glowed brightly. Marcia had folded her parka into a pillow, placed it under Pug's reclining head. Pug began to snore. "Is he all right?" I asked. Marcia smiled, and again I felt that curious weakness. I would have licked her boots for her any time, and when she smiled I would have cut off my own arm if she'd asked me to. "He's all right," she said. "Let him rest. I don't think he's slept in the past 2 weeks." "Okay." I tried to sound casual. "Let him spend the night in his chair. But hadn't you better lie down? There's a cot in the back room." "No, thank you." She smiled again. "I'll sit with him. I'm really used to it, George." "Good enough." I returned to the front of the saloon, for the first time thankful that this girl had been so engrossed with her sick father that she'd scarcely noticed anything else. Al and Moosehide looked uneasily at me as I laid the 30-06 across my knees and pulled a chair in front of the door. If anything came in that door, I determined, it was going to cross my dead body before it got to the girl in back. Ain't you taking this a mite serious?" Moosehide demanded. "Lie down," I said. "Try to get some sleep. We've a job to do in the morning." "Well, I suppose it's all right if you say so." All night I kept vigil before the door, the cocked rifle across my lap. It seemed unreal, almost ridiculous. I, George Mallory, waiting with a rifle across my lap for something that I could not see when it came. As the slow hours dragged by, it seemed sillier than ever, and all my thoughts of last night even more silly. No, there had to be some more reasonable explanation of everything. The thin grey daylight crept upon us, and I think that is the time when I dozed off. I was awakened by a rush of cold air in the face, and jumped up. Moosehide sat on the bar, nonchalantly swinging his legs. I looked toward the back end of the saloon, saw Pug still sprawled across his table. "Where's Marcia?" I demanded. "Why, she said she was going to take and get Pug some hot victuals," Moosehide drawled. "When did she go?" maybe 2 minutes passed. I sprang to the door and looked out, just in time to see Marcia Davenport across the street, standing directly over the little black stick. She bent forward until her head almost brushed the snow and straightened. I gasped, took one step toward her, but even as I did, I saw her lifted into the air and begin to float away. The little black stick floated beside her. I was ice cold. If Marcia Davenport was not alive in it, I knew that the world would offer no more inducement for me to stay alive. But yet I did not run after her. I was thinking more completely and swiftly than I had ever thought before. I raced to the back of the room and slapped Pug Davenport across the cheek. He mumbled and shifted his head to the other arm. I slapped him again and again, and when slapping did no good, poured a bucket of cold water over his head. Pug awoke slowly and blinked at me. "Pug!" I screamed. "Listen, the duckfoot and the stick! They have taken Marcia." Never before have I seen so swift a change in any man. Pug leaped erect. There was no trace of fear in him now, no hesitation, and at that moment I was very proud to be a human being. This little derelict had come in from the Barrens, terrified by something that had taken place out there. But when the same thing threatened his daughter, Pug could forget his own fear to go to her aid. He snatched the 30-06 from my hands and raced out the door. Though my legs are longer than his, it was very hard just to keep up. Again, as soon as we got outside, there was an aura of ermine musk. A hollow exclamation, a parody of that which might come from a human hunter who has just bagged an especially fine head of game, seemed to linger in the air. And there were the duck tracks, huge triangular marks in the snow. If I breathed any sort of prayer, it was one of thanksgiving that there was no blowing snow this morning to cover them. We raced out of town into the Barrens, stopping where the thing had stepped, running as hard as we could. And it was a half-mile away, almost in North City's backyard, that we came upon the snowbank. Something huge and powerful had piled that snow, and I looked with glazed eyes upon the things that were hanging from it. The skins of Matt Braziel, Joe Urschel, Lorna Thomas, stretched on the snow as we would stretch bearskins. The frozen, nude carcasses were cast haphazardly into the snow before it. I gasped. A trapper that sought the skins of human beings just as we sought those of foxes. I saw Marcia. She was hanging, head down, from the snowbank. The black stick on top of the bank at her feet seemed to be holding her up. There was absolutely no evidence of anything else, yet I knew something was there. From Pug Davenport's throat there rolled a hoarse, terrible, snarling animal cry. He threw himself down on one knee and leveled the rifle. I could still see nothing, but he took a steady aim. He pressed the trigger. The rifle blasted. At the same time, a fine spray erupted from the snowbank. I saw Marcia slide from it, crawl a little way through the snow, and get up to run toward me. More snow flew. There was a great threshing, as though up there near the bank some mighty animal was in its death throes. Pug shot again, and again. A wild scream split the air. I saw a line of duck tracks coming toward us, and Pug shot again. He clubbed the rifle and raced forward to give battle to whatever opposed him. A huge bloodstain spread on the snow. I heard Pug gasp, saw him borne backwards on the snow. His throat seemed of its own volition to be constricting. His eyes bulged, and horrible, gasping breath sputtered from his open mouth. I sprang forward, receiving a mighty blow that sent me reeling back. When I had recovered, Pug Davenport lay quietly on the snow. The line of duck tracks, marked frequently by huge splashes of blood, was wobbling across the Barrens. I saw them reach the Sheep River, and another terrible scream floated back as the ice parted and the river's freezing waters opened to receive the thing. When I looked for the little black stick, It was nowhere to be seen. Marcia was coming toward me, like one awakening from a dream. She looked down at Pug, and I saw the agony that crossed her eyes. Just as swiftly, I saw her conquer it. She shook her head. "What happened?" she asked. "I left Urschel's, and that's the last I remember." I stared past her, fascinated by the black, gaping hole in the river where the thing had gone down. With an effort, I tore my eyes away from it, looked back at Marcia. Strength returned, and with it came sense. I looked straight into her eyes, anything to keep her from turning her head to see what was left of the 3 human beings trapped by the thing. I began, and stopped. "Marcia, when grief is gone, let pride replace it. North City lives because Pug Davenport died." I dared not continue. To blurt out the truth and have this girl, who to me meant more than anything else on earth, question my own sanity. At the moment, I questioned it myself. But not after Marcia walked up to me, buried her face in my chest, and started to cry. Then I knew that at last Marcia Davenport had given herself to me, that happiness and delight would spring out of the seeds planted by death and terror. I looked once more at the tracks and the great blood splashes in the snow. The wind would cover them. The Sheep River did not give up its dead. As I gathered Marcia a little closer to me, I looked down at the face of her father. For the first time, it seemed a peaceful and a happy face. And I blessed the thought that had bade me wake Pug Davenport up and set him out to rescue his daughter. The thing was of no color that normal eyes could see, but Pug's eyes were the only ones in North City that did not react normally. Of all the men who had ever been there, he was the only one who was totally colorblind. The Shingler by E. L. Wright. "We're almost there, boys," I said as I steered the old jalopy off the main highway onto an apparently long unused lane, a lane overgrown with weeds. It was difficult keeping the old buggy in the tracks. It jounced up and down, but we kept on going. My 6-year-old brother, Tommy, was having a fine time. "Think we can go fishing? Maybe catch some fish for supper?" eagerly queried Bill, my in-between brother. "I think so," I answered with adult importance. I was remembering my mother's 1,001 instructions covering this week's outing. At first she had been reluctant for us to go, but Dad had talked her out of it. "After all," Dad had said, "isn't Louis practically a man? It'll do him good, having the responsibility of looking after Tommy and Bill." So Mum had agreed. Personally, my only worry was that Tommy would get homesick and want to return home after a day or two. Right now, he was the liveliest of the trio. "There it is," he shouted. "Boy, oh boy!" Ahead lay the lodge my boss had practically insisted on my using when he heard I had no definite plans for my vacation other than camping out for a week. I had protested, but Mr. Cabot exclaimed, "Nonsense, my boy. It'll be almost the same as camping out. I'm afraid the lodge isn't in very good shape. We haven't used it in years. Belonged to my wife's grandfather." I brought the car to a halt. Tommy was out immediately, prancing about. "Looks like Mr. Cabot was right," I remarked to Bill as I surveyed the scene before us. The weather-beaten lodge, a low rambling affair, sprawled between tall pines, the foliage so dense the sky above was scarcely visible, a veritable wilderness. "The door's open," yelled Tommy from the lodge door. He disappeared inside. I shrugged, stuffed the key back in my pocket, got out of the car and stretched my legs. Bill started loading his arms with camping paraphernalia. "We won't take anything in till we've cleaned the joint up a bit," I told him. The lodge was indeed in a bad state of disrepair. The hinges on the door creaked rustily. At our every step, the floorboards groaned. "Hope it doesn't rain." Bill cast an anxious eye at the ceiling. "Doesn't look as if anyone's been here in 1,000 years. "Not quite that long," I retorted. A loud, resounding crash caused us to run into one of the rooms off the main living room. Tommy, a ludicrous expression on his face, sat in the middle of what was once a bed. "I was only testing it," he said ruefully. "Bill and I'll do the testing around here. Good thing it didn't go clear through the floor with you." I lightly fanned his backside as he scrambled from the bed. "You come along with us where we can watch you." "Carry me piggyback, Louis," he begged. So our tour of inspection was completed, with my acting as beast of burden for Tommy. The lodge consisted of a huge living room with a fireplace, a kitchen with a wood-burning stove, and 3 bedrooms. "One for each of us," beamed Tommy. We were standing in the 3rd bedroom. I looked about thoughtfully. "This looks like our best bet," I said to Bill, ignoring Tommy. "If it does rain, there are fewer places for it to leak in, and it'll be easier for us to fix." "Okay," agreed Bill. "The 3 of us in here, huh?" "Yeah, we can move this bed in one of the other rooms and set up our cots in here." Tommy whined a little at sleeping in the same room, but his attention was soon diverted. As soon as we'd brought everything in from the car, we'd go down to the lake and see if we could catch any fish for supper. A little elbow grease made the lodge livable, and we were soon down by the lake. The fish were so plentiful that even Tommy caught 4 without half trying. Game was plentiful too, I noticed, as we followed a path overgrown with weeds back to the lodge. "Wish we'd brought a gun along," sighed Bill. "Why can't we set a snare, Louis?" asked Tommy eagerly. By this time, he was a thoroughly dirty little boy, but having the time of his life. "Will you help me fix a trap, Louis? Will you? Promise?" I promised. "You'd think Mr. Cabot would be up here every weekend, wouldn't you?" I inquired of Bill. "It's a regular sportsman's paradise." Bill shrugged. "Maybe he's an indoor man." "Maybe so, but I can't figure out why he let the place practically decay." Tommy had been running ahead of us, his line of fish trailing in the high weeds. Now he came tearing back, brought the fish up suddenly, barely missing my face. "Can I fry my own fish? Can I, huh?" "Yes, you can fry your own fish, and eat them too." Satisfied, he ran ahead again. Supper over, we sprawled in front of the fireplace, which we had cleaned out so it didn't smoke too badly. Tommy's eyes began to droop. Bill picked him up, carried him into the bedroom. I yawned, looked at my watch, then pillowed my head in my arms. A sudden rush of cold air swept over me. Bill stepping out for a bit of fresh air before retiring, I thought drowsily. "Hey there, close that door." I opened one eye. The cold night air continued to flow in. "Bill!" I called. Both eyes were open now. No answer. The dying embers of the fire cast weird shadows about the room. The wind was rising too, and the rustling trees whispered to one another. Sitting up, I looked at my watch. Almost midnight. I had been sleeping there almost an hour. Better hit the hay, I decided. Tommy'd be up at the crack of dawn, and that would mean no more sleep as far as Bill and I were concerned. Wondering why Bill was remaining outdoors so long, I hoisted my 161 pounds from the floor and lumbered to the open door. "Bill!" I called, peering out into the night. "Bill!" This time a little louder. Only the sounds of the forest nightlife greeted me. Suddenly, "What do you want?" The sleep-filled voice came from behind me. Turning, I saw Bill, clad only in his shorts, shivering in the bedroom door. I blinked, feeling rather foolish. "Gosh, Bill, I'm sorry. The wind must have blown the door open. I thought you'd gone out." I stepped inside and firmly latched the door, then tried it to make sure Mr. Wind couldn't get in again. "Come on to bed," Bill mumbled. His cot creaked as he flung himself down. I banked the fire in the fireplace, then stripped down to my underclothes. For some reason, my feet carried me over to the door. I tried it again. Satisfied, I went into the bedroom, straightened the covers over Tommy, then tumbled into my own canvas cot. A second later, I was fast asleep. The next thing I knew, I was awake, listening intently for something. I raised up on one elbow. There it was again. A tap, 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 almost a hammering sound. Then silence. Silly, I told myself. Probably a branch hitting against the roof. I lay back, closed my eyes. Another sound, like someone walking back and forth on the roof. I shook my head. Only a squirrel or some tiny animal. But it didn't seem a tiny creature like a squirrel could make that much noise. Bill slept peacefully on. Tommy turned from side to side. Too much fish. The kid was probably having nightmares. Then once again, the tap-tapping started up. I could stand it no longer. Separating myself from the blanket in which I was wrapped, I walked stealthily to the window, peered through into the inky blackness. There was a thin, wavering light straggling through the tall trees. The moon. The tall pines swayed to and fro. Such darned nonsense. Why couldn't I accept these noises for what they really were? But I continued to stand there, waiting for the tapping to start up. Apparently the tapping had ceased for the night. Becoming aware of the cold, I hugged my shoulders and half-turned from the window. A harsh, rending sound caused me to leap at least 3 feet in the air, landing with my face up against the window. Something came hurtling down past the window to land with a dull thud on the ground. I must have exclaimed, for Bill and Tommy both materialized at my side. "What's up?" Bill was wide awake. Tommy tugged at my shorts. "What is it, Louis? Let me see." "Something fell from the roof," I said to Bill, rather foolishly. "Cripes, probably a pine cone or twig." Bill stuck his face against the window. "Lift me up. I want to see too." Tommy was insistent, and my shorts were threatening to slip over my hips. Reaching down, I lifted Tommy with one arm, swung him up to my shoulder. The rending noise came again. This time Tommy reacted, and I had to hold on with both arms to keep him from falling to the floor. Even Bill looked startled. A dark shadow outside the window, followed by a thud as the shadow hit the ground. Then Bill's taut face relaxed into a grin of derision. "You've been reading too many weird tales, Louis." "All right, mastermind, what is it?" "Just stay put a minute, and I'll show you." In a flash, he was out of the bedroom, bare feet and all. Tommy quivered a little. Pulling the blanket from my cot, I threw it around his shoulders. Another minute, then Bill was back in the room, grinning derisively. "Here's your bogeyman." He thrust 2 battered wooden shingles at me. Tommy laughed with Bill. Taking a shingle from Bill, he began hitting me over the head with it, chanting, "Louis saw a bogeyman, Louis saw a bogeyman." "I'll bogeyman you, young fellow." Unceremoniously, I dumped boy, shingle, blanket and all on the cot. I tried to relieve my feelings by being gruff. You'll have to admit these surroundings are conducive to witchcraft and spook lore. I addressed Bill. "Yeah, I know. Bill took the shingle and whacked me with it. This was a signal for Tommy to begin again. The fighting was fast and furious. Then I had to admit defeat. It took some time to fix up the cots again. In the wild melee, mine had overturned, strewing bedclothes over the floor. Tommy thrashed about in his cot, no longer sleepy. Before Bill got into bed, he came and stood over me, assuming a mock-serious posture. "Now, let Dr. Bill feel your pulse." Normal. Go to sleep like a good little boy, and Mr. Sandman will bring you a nice big lollipop." I slapped his hand away. Tommy giggled. "Feel my pulse, Bill." He bounced up and down a couple times. Going over to Tommy, Bill went through the same routine, then tucked the blanket up around his chin. "Maybe we can catch the squirrel on the roof, huh, Bill?" Tommy murmured happily. "We'll catch Louis's bogeyman for him," Bill said, but I ignored him. I'd acted pretty silly, getting upset over the wind whipping shingles loose. We'd better fix them, tack them on a little more securely. I turned on my left side, looked out of the window. The thin, wavering streak of moonlight shone in. The old man in the moon was laughing at me. A breakfast of flapjacks, bacon, and strong coffee. Tommy insisted on equality, so he had coffee too, diluted heavily with milk. This outing was a treat for him in more ways than one. I hoped we weren't spoiling him too much. "What'll we do first?" questioned Tommy, his mouth full of bacon. Innocently, Bill kept his eyes on his plate. I think the first thing on the agenda will be the bedroom roof. We'd better nail those loose shingles on more securely, or your big brother Louis'll be having nightmares every night." Poising my tin coffee cup as if to heave it at him, I suddenly remembered something. I'd been the first one up, and the outside door had been standing open. Eagerly, I brought him to task. "Begging your humble pardon, I hate to mention it, but I found the door standing wide open this morning. In your haste to show Tommy what a dope he has for a big brother, you left the door open for all the bears and wolves in the forest to enter and eat us alive in our beds." Bill's face showed disbelief. "You're screwy. I made sure the door was latched." "Sorry, it was wide open when I got up this morning." Bill turned to Tommy. "You didn't get up before we did this morning, did you, Tommy?" Tommy vigorously denied this accusation. Shrugging, Bill passed it off. "Guess we'll have to fix the door, too." Manlike, we let the breakfast dishes set. I persuaded Bill the business of repairing the roof could be put off for the time being. The woods was teeming with animal life. We fixed a couple of rude traps and could hardly pull Tommy away from them. He wanted to stick close by and watch the snares in operation, but we lured him on. Finding a beautiful little cave, we were soon frolicking in the water sans bathing trunks. The water was soft, velvety. After a lot of splashing on the part of Tommy, we stretched out to dry. "This is the life." Bill stretched out luxuriantly. "Wonder what the gang's doing now," he mused. "Envying you," I gave satisfactory reply. Tommy popped out with, "I'm gonna tell Bobby and Jackie I went in swimming without any clothes at all, and I'm gonna tell Jimmy and Harold and Willis and Denny and—" "Hey there," I interrupted. "Sounds like you're going to tell all the world about it." Purring contentedly, he wriggled into a more comfortable position. Sure enough, on our way back to the lodge we discovered a rabbit in one snare. Taking it out, we fixed the snare up again. Fried rabbit. Bill smacked his lips together. Tommy put in his claim. "I get the tail. I'm going to give it to Mama for a powder puff." The rabbit cleaned, and Tommy in possession of its tail, Bill and I proceeded with the job of repairing the roof. "No, you're not getting up on the roof." I was firm with Tommy. "You can gather up the shingles on the ground and hand them to us." Bill, from his perch on the roof, yelled down, "Go in the bedroom and bring out the shingles I took in last night." Dutifully, Tommy streaked into the house. I climbed to the rooftop, started pounding with my makeshift hammer. "They aren't there!" Tommy stood on the ground looking up at us. "Did you bring them out this morning?" Bill turned to me. "I didn't touch 'em," I replied, then called down to Tommy. "Are you sure you didn't do something with them?" He shook his head. "You didn't use them for kindling wood this morning and forget about it?" I asked Bill sarcastically. He frowned. "Come to think of it, I don't recollect seeing them when I got up." Pursing my lips together, I admitted, "Neither do I." Then added impatiently, "Someone's crazy around here, but it isn't me." Bill let go with a shingle. I looked down again for Tommy, but he was gone. "He's probably trying to play some sort of joke on us. Let it go," Bill said soothingly. Why get upset? I asked myself. Bill's right, the kid's trying to get my goat. But I relieved my pent-up emotion by hammering fast and furiously. "Louis! Louis!" Tommy had reappeared below and was calling my name insistently. I stopped hammering. "Yes?" "The man says for you to stop shingling." Tommy was looking up, wide-eyed and innocent. Usually I could tell when he indulged in fairy tales or pranks. He couldn't keep a certain telltale twinkle from his eye. But now his entire mien was serious. "What man?" asked Bill. "The man in the bedroom," returned Tommy. "Oh, so now there's a man in the bedroom." Bill leaned over the edge of the roof. "And what's the man doing in the bedroom?" "Sleeping." "Did you hear that?" Bill turned his head toward me. "There's a man sleeping in our bedroom." "Oh, he isn't in our bedroom," protested Tommy. Bill's eyebrows raised. "No? No, he's in the bedroom in the back." "And just what were you doing in the back bedroom?" I asked rather harshly. Tommy looked somewhat hurt at the sharpness of my voice. "I was looking for the shingles. He's a very nice man. I showed him my rabbit's tail, and he said he gave one just like it to his mother when he was a little boy, and she liked it very much." He looked up appealingly. "Do you think Mama will really like it?" "Listen, young man," I said truculently. "No one's going to like you if you persist in making up tall tales like this man in the bedroom." I began hammering again. Bill, realizing Tommy was getting my goat, grinned and called out, "What's the man's name, Tommy?" "I didn't ask him, but I will," replied Tommy soberly. He turned to enter the lodge. "Just a minute, I'll go along." Bill slid down the roof and made the short jump to the ground. "I'll go along too," I said casually, and followed them through the lodge into the back bedroom. It was empty. Tommy looked about, surprised. He was a good little actor, I thought, as he walked over to the dust-covered bed, then turned to face us. "He was here. Truly he was. Cross my heart and hope to die." He went through the motions of making the cross. "And he said for us to stop shingling," repeated Bill. "Uh-huh. He said shingling this lodge was his job, and no one else could do it." Tommy looked her squarely in the eyes. "You don't believe me, but that's what he told me. He said nobody else could shingle. He'd only have to tear the shingles off and do it over again." He drew a deep breath, then continued. "He said if I was a good boy and got you to stop hammering so he could go to sleep again, he'd let me help him shingle some night." He added forlornly, "I guess he couldn't sleep." I clamped my teeth together, but Bill burst out laughing. "Looks like we've got the makings of a writer in the family, eh, Louis? Tommy can write 'em and you can read 'em." But I didn't think it at all funny. "What'll we call your friend, Tommy?" Bill led the way back into the living room. "He's the Shingler," replied Tommy, matter-of-factly. "That's good. Or the shingling ghost," was Bill's suggestion. I added sarcastically, or the ghost who shingles at night. Gaily, we set off on another fishing expedition, but secretly I was having qualms about nightfall. Tommy had never been an overly imaginative child, I mused as I lay on my cot that night. What had made him concoct such a wild story? Or was it? Anyway, I had taken the precaution of rearranging the cots. Turning slightly, I could see Tommy sleeping peacefully on his cot, placed between mine and Bill's. Bill's breathing was deep, interspersed by an occasional light snoring sound. But I couldn't sleep. Leaning over the edge of my cot, I fumbled for the flashlight I had carefully placed on the floor. Its beam on my watch indicated 11:15. I lay waiting. Waiting for what? I asked myself scornfully. The night was chilly, but perspiration beaded my forehead. My ears strained for every sound. Crickets chirping, the rustle of the wind through the trees, an owl policing the deep woods. My throat was parched. I wished we were home, back in the city with its flashing neon lights and the rumble of the elevated. Something was wrong with this place, with its eerie atmosphere. Nothing you could actually lay a finger on, but it was there, nevertheless. Unable to stand it any longer, I kicked the covers down to the foot of the cot, then stood. A tremor ran through my entire frame. Picking my way carefully past the other two cots, I made my way to the living room, leaving the door between the living room and bedroom ajar. A faint glow came from the fireplace. I had undressed in the living room, and my clothes were hanging over the back of the chair where I had left them. I slipped into my pants, drew on a lumber jacket, then headed for the kitchen, where I practically drained the tin bucket of well water we had brought in from the outside pump. Why I did it I don't know, but I stood by the door of the back bedroom, listening. On a sudden impulse, my hand reached out and turned the knob. Only shadows. Big shadows, small shadows, fat shadows, thin shadows. But that was all. Back in the living room, I tested the outside door. Satisfied, I stretched out in front of the fireplace, using Bill's jacket for a pillow. Drawing a deep breath, I closed my eyes and began counting, mumbling to myself. 1 shingle, 2 shingles, 3 shingles, 154 shingles, and I was out. But no sooner had I entered that limbo known as Slumberland than I was wide awake again, sitting bolt upright. It had started. Someone was up on that roof, shingling. There was the rhythmic tap-tap at the hammer. Then came a rending sound, like a shingle being torn loose from the roof and ending with a dull thud as it landed on the ground. What was that Tommy had said about his shingling ghost? Shingling this lodge was his job, and nobody else could do it. He'd only have to tear the shingles off and do it over again. And it sounded exactly like that was what the puckish fellow was up to now. This was no job of the wind, no figment of the imagination. Someone was up there, busily shingling the roof in the dead of night. And to make matters worse, the outside door was now standing wide open. Like a flash, I was on my feet, armed only with a thick, ugly stick of wood. "Better get Bill," something whispered inside me. Keeping a cautious eye on that open door, I stepped to the bedroom door, called softly, "Bill!" Then I froze, as my glance extended beyond Bill's cot to the one in the center. Empty! Tommy's cot was empty. Roughly, I shook Bill by the shoulder. Rolling over, he opened one eye and muttered, "Nightmares. Louis having another nightmare." This time I shook him so hard his teeth chattered. "Bill, Tommy's missing. and the front door's open. He was on his feet in an instant. The back bedroom. Armed with the stick of wood in one hand, flashlight in the other, we raced for the back bedroom. The tapping noise had stopped, but now Bill, too, heard the sound of shingles being ripped from the roof, then tossed to the ground. Stopping dead still, he cocked his head to one side and listened, frowning. "You're right," he exclaimed. "There is someone on that roof." The back bedroom revealed only Tommy's rabbit tail lying on the foot of the bed, as if dropped there hurriedly. I didn't like it. "Outside," I said to Bill. As we neared the door, the hammering sound started up again. Cautiously, we crept out into the night. The lodge was L-shaped, and from where we stood, a shadowy figure was visible on the roof. Tommy! He was standing as if listening to someone, standing dangerously near the edge of the roof. I started forward, but Bill placed a restraining arm in front of me. "Don't startle him," he hissed. "He might fall off." I nodded silently, and we padded forward on the soft, cushiony grass. Our eyes glued to that rooftop. The hammering continued. But it was not Tommy who wielded the hammer. I blinked, screwed my eyes up tight, then opened them wide. Everything within me strained to see the other person on the roof, but there was no one. The hammering stopped. Then came the rending noise. Tommy took a step nearer the edge of the roof, stooped down. I held my breath. One more step, and he would come hurtling from the rooftop to the ground. He rose from his stooping position, turned, and let the shingle he had picked up fall to the ground. It landed within a few feet of Bill and me. Tommy said something, smiled. "Good God," whispered Bill hoarsely. "What is it? Something's got to be up there. Tommy could never have climbed up there by himself." He uttered my very thoughts. Tommy took a step back, and I heaved an inward sigh of relief. Then suddenly his body jerked and he slid forward. My heart almost stopped beating. It was as if an unseen hand had reached out and shoved Tommy. Every nerve in my body tingled. I heard Bill gasp in horror. In that same split second, we both rushed forward to try to receive that tiny body before it hit the ground. I braced myself, arms ready. My lips moved in silent prayer. The roof was higher at this point. A fall from this height could result only in tragedy. It seemed I stood there for an eternity. Then mercifully, Tommy's lean young body landed squarely in my arms with such force that I fell back onto the soft, springy grass. Tommy began to cry. I didn't blame him. I felt like crying too. Bill rushed over to us, helped me to my feet. I was still clutching Tommy in my arms. "Let's get out of here," Bill cried out. Then began the barrage that was to haunt us all. Shingles began flying from the roof, all aimed straight for us. One hit me on the forehead, and I felt a trickle of blood run down the side of my face. A hammer came hurtling through the air, barely missing Tommy's head. Shingles, nothing but flying shingles. Bill cried out as one crashed against his skull. "The car!" I thrust the keys at him. "Start the car!" Catching the keys, Bill turned and sprinted towards the old jalopy, parked a short distance from the lodge. I followed, but Tommy's weight slowed me down a bit. The shingles kept coming. Now and then one found its target and stung like fire. Bill had the jalopy tuned up, waiting. Hastily, I dumped the sobbing boy into the seat. "Get her going," I yelled to Bill. Clinging to the side of the car, my feet planted firmly on the running board, I looked back to see the brick chimney shatter and crumple as though from a mighty blow. "Faster!" I urged Bill, as a brick sped like lightning through the air, striking the rear of the car. That mad shingling ghost was hurling everything in sight at us. Fortunately, however, the distance we had now covered was sufficient so that this new barrage could do no damage. I heaved a sigh of relief when the main highway came into sight. It was morning when we reached the city. The hands on the big clock on the tower pointed to 8:30. My fright was now gone. In its place, a cold anger. "Turn here," I instructed Bill tersely. "I want to stop off at the office." "Yeah," Bill replied. "I'd like to say a thing or two to that boss of yours." An auto horn beeped. Tommy stirred, sat up suddenly. "It's all right," I reassured him, and wiped his tear-stained face with my handkerchief. "We'll soon be home." Mr. Cabot was in his office already, dictating to his secretary. He jumped up when we barged in, dismissed the secretary. "What happened, boys? What are you doing back so soon?" "Mr. Cabot, you know what happened. But why did you send us there?" Mr. Cabot mopped his forehead, poured a glass of water from a carafe on his desk, and gulped it down. "You're all right?" he asked anxiously. "We're all right now, but Tommy came pretty close to being killed." Anxiety creased Mr. Cabot's features. "Tell me what happened." Briefly, I sketched the previous night's adventures. He kept nodding from time to time. When I finished, he turned to Tommy, started asking questions. Tommy, realizing the danger was over, began to enjoy his position in the spotlight. Yes, he had actually seen an old man. The man had been asleep in the back bedroom, the first time Tommy had seen him. He said he liked Tommy, and wished Tommy would stay at the lodge to keep him company. Then, the next night the old man had come into our bedroom, wakened Tommy, and told him he could help him shingle the roof. Tommy hadn't been at all afraid. The old man had been so very nice. Everybody had a job, explained the old man. His particular task was to shingle the lodge roof. So, every night after midnight, he nailed down so many shingles, tore loose so many for work the next night. It was beginning to be rather lonesome up there, night after night, all by himself. Tommy was such a nice little boy, and he had thought out a way so that Tommy could remain there with him. Such a simple, easy way. Then he had pushed Tommy off the roof. Mr. Cabot stopped his pacing. Perspiration stood out on his forehead. He asked Tommy one more question. "Did the old man tell you his name?" Without hesitation, Tommy replied, "Sylvester Whiteneck." All colour drained from Mr. Cabot's face, and he sagged back against the desk for support. "Boys," he said, "Sylvester Whiteneck was my wife's grandfather. 45 years ago, while shingling the roof of the lodge, Sylvester Whiteneck fell from that roof, dead." Mr. Sliggins by Gary Gordon.
"Do as you're told, or Mr. Sliggins will get you,"
said Jonathan's mother teasingly, but at the same time quite serious with her threat. Immediately, the boy put down the peanut butter and closed the pantry door. That particular warning was something his mother had received on many occasions from her own mother when she was a child. Mr. Sliggins, according to Jonathan's grandmother, had apparently been a monstrous and highly dangerous man who was said to have terrorized the streets of Victorian London during the late 1800s. During Queen Victoria's reign, many slums lurked behind the capital's busy thoroughfares, and Mr. Sliggins was alleged to have prowled these areas, seizing on the opportunity to snatch young waifs, luring them in with his likable demeanour and magic tricks performed with the use of his old grimy top hat. After gaining their trust, he would then smuggle them away and perform cruel and ghastly experiments on them, experiments that would often culminate with their demise by way of drowning. The method Mr. Sliggins chose to do this would often involve sealing the terrified urchin inside an old wooden alcohol barrel. He would then observe how long the barrel remained afloat before it disappeared below the surface into the black, murky depths of the River Thames. It was claimed that Mr. Sliggins was the owner of a large brewery, thus giving him easy access to any number of these barrels, although this assertion was never confirmed in historical records. Indeed, no records of this man or any of his criminal acts were ever unearthed by Jonathan's mother. Was it all true, or just a tale? She was never able to find out. Jonathan Rose lived with his mother, Olivia Rose, just south of the River Thames in a large Victorian terraced house on the fringes of Plumstead Common, within the borough of Greenwich, London. It was bedtime for Jonathan. He crawled up the stairs as slowly as he could get away with, then trudged into the bathroom to brush his teeth. Picking up the toothpaste, he glanced into the small round mirror on the wall above the sink, and thought he saw the reflection of someone going by the open bathroom door. He presumed it was just his mother. "I'm brushing my teeth," he shouted, thinking nothing of it. "No need to be checking on me." Jonathan finished brushing and spat out the foaming paste. After rinsing his face with cold water, he hated it warm. He once again looked into the mirror and glimpsed another figure passing the bathroom door, this time in the opposite direction, back towards the stairs. "Night, mother," he said, quietly and confidently. Quickly, the boy rinsed out the sink and switched off the light. As he left the room, he noticed something. It was a large, tatty old handkerchief sprawled across the landing floor. He thought briefly about shouting his mother, but decided against it, choosing instead to drape the handkerchief over the banister. "She's so untidy," he chuckled to himself in mild frustration, shaking his head at the same time. It wasn't particularly late, but it was a Sunday evening, meaning school the next day. At 11 years old, Jonathan would soon be starting high school. He always felt much older than his younger years suggested, or so he would imagine to himself. To his mother, naturally, he was just the same as any other child of his age, having a liking for treats between meals and a tendency to misbehave. As he made his way along the landing to the bedroom, Jonathan thought he heard a voice, an incredibly quiet voice, whispering the words, "Here we go then." The voice seemed to be emanating from directly above his head. Instinctively, he looked up. All he saw were dancing dark shadows cast from the living room below, forming strange shapes and eerie patterns across the peeling purple paintwork. The boy shook his head and rubbed his eyes. He knew deep down it must be his overactive imagination that had been oddly activated by his mother's earlier iteration of the Sliggins warning. Trying his best not to think about it, Jonathan entered his room, removed his slippers, and climbed into bed. London City Airport was just across the river, and the sound of incoming and outgoing aircraft was a familiar disturbance to the sleeping patterns of many residents. However, on this night, it wasn't just the planes causing the boy's insomnia. For some reason, Jonathan just couldn't get the thought of Mr. Sliggins out of his head. When issued with his mother's threat, he would usually do as he was told and then think no more of it. After all, it was just one of those things that parents said to elicit a response. Of course, being more intelligent and grown up than most children his age, he knew this very well. His mother, on the other hand, was very childish, he thought, constantly getting her own way and sulking when she didn't. She always had to be right, and argued that she was never in the wrong. The boy had witnessed conflicts of this nature on many occasions whilst out shopping and when visiting relatives and friends. Very childish, he often thought. The wind howled strongly outside, and the rain battered the window. Jonathan continued to lie awake, not because of the weather or the sound of his mother laughing and shouting at the television downstairs, but because of the constant image of Mr. Sliggins worming away in his thoughts. The boy visualized him dressed in black Victorian attire, complete with old battered top hat. In fact, not too dissimilar to a character from Oliver Twist, a book that he had recently studied at school. A couple of hours passed by. Jonathan could now hear mumbling and snippets of strange-sounding conversations coming from below. It sounded as though the television had increased in volume, but he thought nothing of it. Instead, he turned over and concentrated on trying to get some sleep. Suddenly, Jonathan was snapped from his imaginings by the sound of a loud, piercing scream downstairs. He immediately pulled the bedsheet over his head. His heart was beating rapidly, and his breathing was becoming heavier, especially now that the supply of oxygen had begun to dwindle in his cotton hideaway. Pulling the sheet away again, the boy took a big gulp of air and stared intently at the bedroom door. After much deliberation, Jonathan climbed slowly from his bed and tentatively crept across the room, the only source of light being a dim phosphorus street lamp just outside the window. As he reached the bedroom door, the boy carefully placed an ear against the wood and listened keenly. Trying in vain to shut out the sound of the wind and the rain against the window, Jonathan tussled with his imagination. Is someone else in the house? Has Mother fallen and hurt herself, perhaps? Jonathan battled with his decision process, before finally choosing to slowly open the door. The boy looked out onto the landing. All the lights were off, with the exception of the faint illumination provided by the television in the living room below. Its flickering light struck the spindles of the staircase, casting strange, elongated shadows across the landing wall. From his vantage point by the bedroom door, Jonathan was unable to see into the living room. This made things much worse. His imagination was running wild. All sorts of images were coming to mind. His mother lying injured on the floor, an intruder creeping around down there. Above the din of the wind and the rain, and the noise of the television set below, the boy detected a quiet, scraping sound emanating from the bottom of the carpeted staircase. Hesitantly, Jonathan took a couple of steps towards the landing banister and gazed into the dimness below. Sweat began to form on the boy's brow, his breathing once again becoming increasingly heavy, his heart racing. Then, to his utmost surprise, a small white rabbit appeared below, clumsily hopping its way up the gloomily lit staircase. Jonathan was confused, surprised, and scared simultaneously. The rabbit reached the landing, stopped for a second to look at the boy, then continued its ungraceful lolloping journey in the direction of the darkened bathroom at the top of the stairs, before vanishing from view. Jonathan stood in disbelief. What could have only been a few seconds seemed like forever. Then, somewhat automatically, the boy proceeded to make his way to the top of the stairs. He took the deepest of breaths and slowly began his descent into the living room. He was about halfway down when he stumbled on something. By his feet he saw a pack of playing cards, old and worn, spread out unevenly across a single stair. He frowned and shook his head. He didn't understand what was happening. The house shook and creaked as the heavy rain and fierce winds continued to rage outside. From his position halfway up the stairs, Jonathan was afforded a view of the dark living room, His mother was nowhere to be seen. And then he noticed something strange in the gloom. A scruffy-looking black top hat, just sitting there minding its own business on the multicolored rug in the center of the room. Fear gripped the boy, for the notion of Mr. Sliggins was once again at the forefront of his mind. His thoughts were swift.
The rabbit, the cards, magic tricks, of course.
Jonathan was absolutely terrified. Bravely, the boy continued to the bottom of the stairs and darted across the room, keeping his eyes fixed on the weird hat as he rapidly made his way to the kitchen. It was empty.
Where's Mother? Who screamed?
To Jonathan's ears it sounded like his mother, but how could he be sure? The boy wrestled with his thoughts for a short while before returning to the living room. He looked with trepidation at the hat on the floor, then tried the light switch. Nothing happened.
Maybe the fuses have blown.
Things were becoming increasingly frightening, and yet it was a situation that the boy curiously saw as an opportunity to challenge his idea of what it meant to be mature. He walked across the room towards the front door, but as he went, the hat in the center of the room began to move. Sluggishly, it shook, then started to rise from the floor just a few inches at a time, before settling down again, almost to a stop, before once more gently rising in a measured, consistent manner. Jonathan stood with mouth agape, eyes wide. Then from underneath the slowly rising hat, something began to emerge. A crumpled pair of black shoes, followed by strange legs twisted to form a spiral, sporting a thick, black material. A contorted torso came next, adorned with the same dark covering. Finally, there emerged a slender, wrinkled head, complete with a mass of dirty ginger hair. The boy shook uncontrollably, his mind filled with a strange combination of surprise, humor, and terror. Then, quite unexpectedly, the tangled, twisted mass gradually and deliberately began to unwrap itself, until it was ultimately presented as a fully formed human being, dressed in a shabby top and tail suit. The head, which had been crushed almost to the width of a fist, suddenly popped outwards in an almost comical yet unnerving fashion, the top hat briefly rising, before settling softly at a slight angle on the man's head. "My name is Mr. Sliggins, your very obedient servant," said the strange character. Was the figure real, or was Jonathan still sound asleep in his bed?
If this is actually happening, no one is going to believe it, the boy thought to himself.
The mysterious man just stood there, both hands clasped in front of himself firmly. He stared at Jonathan with an expressionless, immobile face. If the boy's knowledgeable grandmother had been right, then surely this was going to be the end of Jonathan. Another thought raced into his mind.
That's what the screaming must have been. Mother must have seen him. She must have run off without coming to get me.
How typical that would have been of Olivia Rose, always putting herself before others, including her son. It would be of no surprise whatsoever if she had indeed fled from the house, leaving Jonathan to his own devices. The peculiar man spoke again. "Here we go, then." Mr. Sliggins waved his finger from side to side, and as he did so, the hat dropped to the floor, and he was gone. Jonathan jumped in fright, snapping himself out of the trance that had held him. He glanced towards the front door, and then back to the rug. The hat was gone too. The boy charged out of the front door and sped across the road without any thought for his own safety. He ran onto Plumstead Common and kept going until his chest began to burn. Eventually, he was forced to stop and drop to the ground. He was finding it hard to breathe, as if the air was being denied entrance to his lungs.
"Mother!"
he shrieked. A large plane flew low overhead, drowning out Jonathan's cry.
The rain continued to fall around him. The grass on which he sat glistened wet. And it was then that he realized he was sinking into the marshy earth, as though he was being pulled down by some unseen force. The boy struggled against it, but continued to descend into the stinking mud. He clawed frantically at the wet grass around him, as his legs began to disappear into the sludge. Quite abruptly, the descent ceased. Jonathan's feet had come into contact with something solid. The boy looked around him, and in the darkness just behind him was a rubbish bin. He extended his arms, and much to his surprise, managed to reach and get a good grip on two of the bin's metal legs. With an almighty effort, Jonathan hauled himself forward, exhausting every ounce of strength he could muster. Then, gradually, with a look of huge relief on his face, he succeeded in dragging himself out of the murky ditch. Lying on the wet grass, Jonathan rolled over and stared at what was now a muddy hole. The eye of the cavity glared back at him, within which he saw a curious metal band. Carefully, clinging onto the rubbish bin with one hand, the boy scooped the mud away from the metal band and saw that it belonged to an old wooden barrel, the very thing that had prevented his premature burial. Confused, Jonathan climbed to his feet and wandered back towards home. As he went along the road, a white rabbit darted out in front of him and was almost hit by a car as it fled onto the common, disappearing into the darkness. When the boy arrived home, he was in a state of shock and utterly shattered by the unsettling events that had taken place. Removing his filthy clothes, he collapsed onto the couch, trying in vain to make sense of what had happened. Tiredness swiftly gripped him. "Must be a dream. Must be a dream," he repeated to himself, before falling into a long, deep, and haunted sleep. Mrs. Rose emitted a muffled scream, the sound dulled by the oily cloth that had been stuffed between her teeth. Her hands were bound tightly behind her back. From out of the shadows, Mr. Sliggins emerged. Olivia's eyes widened in horror as the figure slowly approached. He walked with a slight limp, his head slightly bowed, so that his eyes could not be seen beneath his hat. Leisurely, he shuffled past the terrified woman, then stopped just a few feet behind her. Independent of the rest of him, his head swung around like a spinning top, quickly followed by his slender body. Tentatively, Mr. Sliggins began to creep up behind Mrs. Rose. This was the first time he had dealt with an adult, and was therefore strangely hesitant. Then, after a few seconds of curious deliberation, he reached out with his long, gangly arms and grabbed the sides of the small wooden chair Olivia was sitting on. "Boo!" he cried out somewhat maniacally. The terrified, incapacitated woman let out yet another dreadful scream. "Here we go, then," Mr. Sliggins said matter-of-factly. With that, he tilted the chair backwards and began to drag it across the room to the open exit of the abandoned boathouse to which he'd brought his victim. Once outside, he unfastened Mrs. Rose from the chair and pushed her squirming body head first into a large wooden barrel that lay on its side. A full moon arose from the clouds, casting a sudden, bright, eerie light across the barrel's metal hoops. Mr. Sliggins' lifeless eyes failed to react to the light, as he quickly attached the thick oak lid and hastily nailed it shut. Without hesitation, the slender figure began to roll the barrel down the dilapidated jetty, rumbling and thumping the old wooden slats as it went. Inside the barrel, Olivia cried out in pain, wincing with every bump and bang of the wood as it rolled down the rickety platform. The inner surface of the barrel splintered, thrusting a sharp shard of rotten wood into her side. Eventually, After what seemed like an eternity to her, she became abruptly aware of the sensation of falling, followed promptly by a harsh jolt as the barrel hit the surface of what could only be the dark river. The full moon shone like a torch onto the chilly water. The rain had stopped, but the wind persisted, aiding the barrel in its journey as it bobbed away downstream. The heavy current took on the appearance of black, lapping hands that seemed hell-bent on forcing the barrel further and further downriver, towards the merciless body of water that was the English Channel. Before long, salt water was dousing Olivia's face, invading her nose. She was nearing the estuary. The tide had turned and was on its way out. Soon, the barrel would be entering the open sea. Her lungs began to burn. She clamped her mouth shut and fought in vain to free her hands. A futile act, as the thick rope binding them together would prevent any hope of escape. The barrel was full of water now. The urge to breathe was unbearable. Olivia's chest was on the brink of collapse.
Please, please,
she silently begged. Bubbles discharged rapidly from her mouth, taking with them any remnants of precious air. Her thoughts were clouded by blackness. Gradually, her life force drifted away. Jonathan shot up from his slumber. He looked around him, the streetlight beyond the window dimly illuminating the room. He was in his bedroom, in his bed. It was a dream. It was all a horrible dream, he thought to himself. But just as he was about to roll over again, he felt something, a kind of light pressure against his legs. Slowly, the encumbrance began to move upwards towards his chest. Immediately, Jonathan sat straight up. In the darkness, he perceived what appeared to be the figure of a man, an exceedingly small man, alarmingly similar to Mr. Sliggins, approximately 7 or 8 inches tall, striding purposely over his body towards his terror-filled face. Then everything went black. Once again, Jonathan abruptly awoke and uttered a deafening scream. He was on the couch, right where he'd collapsed earlier. It was all just a terrible nightmare, wasn't it? The water was cold, icy cold. 2 fishermen were attempting to pull aboard a large wooden object that had become stuck inside one of their nets. Failing to do so, they secured the item to the back of their vessel and returned to the harbour. Back in port, the men hauled the heavy object onto the dockside. It was a wooden barrel. Believing it to hold something of value, one of the men, armed with a crowbar, managed to open the rotting lid. Both men were immediately knocked back by the unbearable stench that greeted them. Inside, amongst the seaweed and flotsam, was a body, a dead, bloated, decaying human body. 10 years later. Jonathan Rose, now 21 years old, strolled along Thames Boulevard. It was a crisp, bright December morning. Tower Bridge was in the distance, partially enveloped by a veil of winter fog. 2 young boys approached, chattering jovially and laughing as they advanced in Jonathan's direction. As they were about to pass, he stopped and tipped his grimy, battered top hat towards them. "Good evening, young sirs," said the man with the expressionless, immobile face. "Should you be in need of my services, I would be honored to be your very obedient servant." After saying which, he slowly turned his head and gazed out across the cold, black, unforgiving river.
The Ninth Skeleton by Clark Ashton Smith. It was beneath the immaculate blue of a morning in April that I set out to keep my appointment with Guinevere. We had agreed to meet on Boulder Ridge at a spot well known to both of us, a small and circular field surrounded with pines and full of large stones, midway between her parents' home at Newcastle and my cabin on the northeastern extremity of the ridge, near Auburn. Guinevere is my fiancée. It must be explained that at the time of which I write, there was a certain amount of opposition on the part of her parents to the engagement, an opposition since happily withdrawn. In fact, they had gone so far as to forbid me to call, and Guinevere and I could see each other only by stealth and infrequently. The ridge is a long and rambling moraine, heavily strewn in places with boulders, as its name implies, and with many outcroppings of black volcanic stone. Fruit ranches cling to some of its slopes, but scarcely any of the top is under cultivation, and much of the soil, indeed, is too thin and stony to be arable. With its twisted pines, often as fantastic in form as the cypresses of the California coast, and its gnarled and stunted oaks, the landscape has a wild and quaint beauty, with more than a hint of the Japanesque in places. It is perhaps 2 miles from my cabin to the place where I was to meet Guinevere. Since I was born in the very shadow of Boulder Ridge, and have lived upon or near it for most of my 30-odd years, I am familiar with every rod of its lovely and rugged extent, and, previous to that April morning, would scarcely have refrained from laughing if anyone had told me I could possibly lose my way. Since then, well, I assure you, I should not feel inclined to laugh. Truly, it was a morning made for the trysts of lovers. Wild bees were humming busily in the patches of clover, and in the ceanothus bushes with their great masses of white flowers, whose strange and heavy perfume intoxicated the air. Most of the spring blossoms were abroad: cyclamen, yellow violet, poppy, wild hyacinth, and woodland star, and the green of the fields was opalescent with their colours. Between the emerald of the buckeyes, the grey-green of the pines, the golden and dark and bluish greens of the oaks, I caught glimpses of the snow-white Sierras to the east, and the faint blue of the coast range to the west, beyond the pale and lilac levels of the Sacramento Valley. Following a vague trail, I went onward through the brushy woodland, and across open fields where I had to thread my way among clustering boulders. My thoughts were all of Guinevere, and I looked only with a casual and desultory eye at the picturesqueness and vernal beauty that environed my path. I was halfway between my cabin and the meeting place, when I became suddenly aware that the sunlight had darkened, and glanced up, thinking, of course, that an April cloud, appearing unobserved from beyond the horizon, had passed across the sun. Imagine, then, my surprise when I saw that the azure of the entire sky had turned to a dun and sinister brown, in the midst of which the sun was clearly visible, burning like an enormous round red ember. Then something strange and unfamiliar in the nature of my surroundings, which I was momentarily at a loss to define, forced itself upon my attention, and my surprise became a growing consternation. I stopped and looked about me, and realized, incredible as it seemed, that I had lost my way, for the pines on either hand were not those that I had expected to see. They were more gigantic, more gnarled than the ones I remembered, and their roots writhed in wilder and more serpentine contortions from a soil that was strangely flowerless, and where even the grass grew only in scanty tufts. There were boulders large as druidic monoliths, and the forms of some of them were such as one might see in a nightmare. Thinking, of course, that it must all be a dream, but with a sense of utter bewilderment which seldom if ever attends the absurdities and monstrosities of nightmare, I sought in vain to orient myself, and to find some familiar landmark in the bizarre scene that lay before me. A path, broader than the one I had been following, but running in what I judged to be the same direction, wound on among the trees. It was covered
with a grey dust, which, as I went forward, became deeper and displayed footprints of a singular form, footprints that were surely too attenuate, too fantastically slender, to be human, despite their 5 toe marks. Something about them, I know not what, something in the nature of their very thinness and elongation, made me shiver. Afterward, I wondered why I had not recognized them for what they were. But at the time, no suspicion entered my mind, only a vague sense of disquietude, an indefinable trepidation. As I proceeded, the pines amid which I passed became momentarily more fantastic and more sinister in the contortions of their boughs and boles and roots. Some were like leering hags, others were obscenely crouching gargoyles. Some appeared to writhe in an eternity of hellish torture. Others were convulsed as with a satanic merriment. All the while, the sky continued to darken slowly, the dun and dismal brown that I had first perceived turning through almost imperceptible changes of tone to a dead funereal purple, wherein the sun smouldered like a moon that had risen from a bath of blood. The trees and the whole landscape were saturated with this macabre purple, were immersed and steeped in its unnatural gloom. Only the rocks, as I went on, grew strangely paler, and their forms were somehow suggestive of headstones, of tombs and monuments. Beside the trail, there was no longer the green of vernal grass, only an earth mottled by drying algae and tiny lichens the color of verdigris. Also, there were patches of evil-looking fungi, with stems of a leprous pallor and blackish heads that drooped and nodded loathsomely. The sky had now grown so dark that the whole scene took on a semi-nocturnal aspect, and made me think of a doomed world in the twilight of a dying sun. All was airless and silent. There were no birds, no insects, no sighing of the pines, no lisping of leaves, a baleful and preternatural silence, like the silence of the infinite void. The trees became denser, then dwindled, and I came to a circular field. Here there was no mistaking the nature of the monolithal boulders. They were headstones and funeral monuments, but so enormously ancient that the letterings or figures upon them were well nigh effaced, and the few characters that I could distinguish were not of any known language. About them there was the hoariness and mystery and terror of incomputable eld. It was hard to believe that life and death could be as old as they. The trees around them were inconceivably gnarled and bowed as with an almost equal burden of years. The sense of awful antiquity that these stones and pines all served to convey increased the oppression of my bewilderment, confirmed my disquietude. Nor was I reassured when I noticed on the soft earth about the headstones a number of those attenuate footprints of which I have already spoken. They were disposed in a fashion that was truly singular, seeming to depart from and return to the vicinity of each stone. Now, for the first time, I heard a sound other than the sound of my own footfalls in the silence of this macabre scene. Behind me, among the trees, there was a sibilant rustling, followed by a faint and evil rattling. I turned and listened. There was something in these sounds that served to complete the demoralization of my unstrung nerves, and monstrous fears, abominable fancies, trooped like the horde of a witch's sabbat through my brain. The reality that I was now to confront was no less monstrous. There was a whitish glimmering in the shadow of the trees, and a human skeleton, bearing in its arms the skeleton of an infant, emerged and came toward me, intent as on some ulterior cryptic purpose, some charnel errand not to be surmised by the living. It went by with a tranquil pace, an effortless and gliding tread, in which,
despite my terror and stupefaction, I perceived a certain horrible and feminine grace. I followed the apparition with my eyes as it passed among the monuments without pausing, and vanished in the darkness of the pines on the opposite side of the field. No sooner had it gone than a second, also bearing in its arms an infant skeleton, appeared and passed before me in the same direction, and with the same abominable and loathsome grace of movement. A horror that was more than horror, a fear that was beyond fear, petrified all my faculties, and I felt as if I were weighted down by some ineluctable and insupportable burden of nightmare. Before me, skeleton after skeleton, each precisely like the last, with the same macabre lightness and ease of motion, each carrying its pitiful infant, emerged from the shadow of the ancient pines and followed where the first had disappeared, intent as on the same cryptic errand. One by one they came, till I had counted 8. Now I knew the origin of the bizarre footprints whose attenuation had disturbed and troubled me. When the 8th skeleton had passed from sight, my eyes were drawn as by some irresistible impulsion to one of the nearer headstones, beside which I was amazed to perceive what I had not noticed before, a freshly opened grave, gaping darkly in the soft soil. Then, at my elbow, I heard a low rattling, and the fingers of a fleshless hand plucked lightly at my sleeve. A skeleton was beside me, differing only from the others through the fact that it bore no infant in its arms. With a lipless and ingratiating leer, it plucked again at my sleeve, as if to draw me toward the open grave, and its teeth clicked as if it were trying to speak. My senses and my brain, a swirling gulfs of hideous terror, could endure no more. I seemed to fall and fall through deeps of infinite eddying blackness, with the clutching terror of those fingers upon my arm, till consciousness was left behind in my descent. When I came to, Guinevere was holding me by the arm, concern and puzzlement upon her sweet oval face, and I was standing among the boulders of the field appointed for our rendezvous. "What on earth is the matter with you, Herbert?" she queried anxiously. "Are you ill? You were standing here in a daze when I came, and didn't seem to hear or see me when I spoke to you. And I really thought you were going to faint when I touched your arm." The Pale Man by Julius Long. I have not yet met the man in number 212. I do not even know his name. He never patronizes the hotel restaurant, and he does not use the lobby. On the 3 occasions when we passed each other by, we did not speak, although we nodded in a semi-cordial, non-committal way. I should like very much to make his acquaintance. It is lonesome in this dreary place. With the exception of the aged lady down the corridor, the only permanent guests are the man in number 212 and myself. However, I should not complain, for this utter quiet is precisely what the doctor prescribed. I wonder if the man in number 212, too, has come here for a rest. He is so very pale, yet I cannot believe that he is ill, for his paleness is not of a sickly cast, but rather wholesome in its ivory clarity. His carriage is that of a man enjoying the best of health. He is tall and straight. He walks erectly and with a brisk, athletic stride. His pallor is no doubt congenital, else he would quickly tan under this burning summer sun. He must have travelled here by auto, for he certainly was not a passenger on the train that brought me, and he checked in only a short time after my arrival. I had briefly rested in my room and was
walking down the stairs when I encountered him ascending with his bag. It is odd that our venerable bellboy did not show him to his room. It is odd, too, that with so many vacant rooms in the hotel, he should have chosen number 212 at the extreme rear. The building is a long, narrow affair, 3 stories high. The rooms are all on the east side, as the west wall is flush with a decrepit business building. The corridor is long and drab, and its stiff, bloated paper exudes a musty, unpleasant odour. The feeble electric bulbs that light it shine dimly as from a tomb. Revolted by this corridor, I insisted vigorously upon being given number 201, which is at the front and blessed with southern exposure. The room clerk, a disagreeable fellow with a Hitler moustache, was very reluctant to let me have it, as it is ordinarily reserved for his more profitable transient trade. I fear my stubborn insistence has made him an enemy. If only I had been as self-assertive 30 years ago. I should now be a full-fledged professor instead of a broken-down assistant. I still smart from the cavalier manner in which the president of the university summarily recommended my vacation. No doubt he acted for my best interests. The people who have dominated my poor life invariably have. Oh, well, the summer's rest will probably do me considerable good. It is pleasant to be away from the university. There is something positively gratifying about the absence of the graduate student face. If only it were not so lonely. I must devise a way of meeting the pale man in number 212. Perhaps the room clerk can arrange matters. I have been here exactly a week, and if there is a friendly soul in this miserable little town, he has escaped my notice. Although the tradespeople accept my money with flattering eagerness, they studiously avoid even the most casual conversation. I am afraid I can never cultivate their society unless I can arrange to have my ancestors recognized as local residents for the last 150 years. Despite the coolness of my reception, I have been frequently venturing abroad. In the back of my mind, I have cherished hopes that I might encounter the pale man in number 211. Incidentally, I wonder why he has moved from number 212. There is certainly little advantage in coming only one room nearer to the front. I noticed the change yesterday, when I saw him coming out of his new room. We nodded again, and this time I thought I detected a certain malign satisfaction in his sombre, black eyes. He must know that I am eager to make his acquaintance, yet his manner forbids overtures. If he wants to make me go all the way, he can go to the devil. I am not the sort to run after anybody. Indeed, the surly diffidence of the room clerk has been enough to prevent me from questioning him about his mysterious guest. I wonder where the pale man takes his meals. I have been absenting myself from the hotel restaurant and patronizing the restaurants outside. At each, I have ventured inquiries about the man in number 210. No one at any restaurant remembered his having been there. Perhaps he has entree into the Brahmin homes of this town, and again, he may have found a boarding house. I shall have to learn if there be one. The pale man must be difficult to please, for he has again changed his room. I am baffled by his conduct. If he is so desirous of locating himself more conveniently in the hotel, why does he not move to number 202, which is the nearest available room to the front? Perhaps I can make his inability to locate himself permanently an excuse for starting a conversation. "I see we are closer neighbors now," I might casually say, but that is too banal. I must await a better opportunity. He has done it again. He is now occupying number 209. I am intrigued by his little game. I waste hours trying to fathom its point. What possible motive could he have? I should think he would get on the hotel people's nerves. I wonder what our combination bellhop chambermaid thinks of having to prepare 4 rooms for a single guest. If he were not stone deaf, I would ask him. At present, I feel too exhausted to attempt such an enervating conversation. I am tremendously interested in the pale man's next move. He must either skip a room or remain where he is. For a permanent guest, a very old lady occupies number 208. She has not budged from her room since I have been here, and I imagine that she does not intend to. I wonder what the pale man will do. I await his decision with the nervous excitement of a devotee of the track on the eve of a big race. After all, I have so little diversion. Well, the mysterious guest was not forced to remain where he was, nor did he have to skip a room. The lady in number 208 simplified matters by conveniently dying. No one knows the cause of her death, but it is generally attributed to old age. She was buried this morning. I was among the curious few who attended her funeral. When I returned home from the mortuary, I was in time to see the pale man leaving her room. Already he has moved in. He favored me with a smile whose meaning I have tried in vain to decipher. I cannot but believe that he meant it to have some significance. He acted as if there were between us some secret that I failed to appreciate. But then, perhaps his smile was meaningless after all, and only ambiguous by chance, like that of the Mona Lisa. My man of mystery now resides in number 207, and I am not the least surprised. I would have been astonished if he had not made his scheduled move. I have almost given up trying to understand his eccentric conduct. I do not know a single thing more about him than I knew the day he arrived. I wonder whence he came. There is something indefinably foreign about his manner. I am curious to hear his voice. I like to imagine that he speaks the exotic tongue of some faraway country. If only I could somehow inveigle him into conversation! I wish that I were possessed of the glib assurance of a college boy who can address himself to the most distinguished celebrity without batting an eye. It is no wonder that I am only an assistant professor. I am worried. This morning I awoke to find myself lying prone upon the floor. I was fully clothed. I must have fallen exhausted there after I returned to my room last night. I wonder if my condition is more serious than I had suspected. Until now, I have been inclined to discount the fears of those who have pulled a long face about me. For the first time I recall the prolonged handclasp of the president when he bade me goodbye from the university. Obviously, he never expected to see me alive again. Of course, I am not that unwell. Nevertheless, I must be more careful. Thank heaven I have no dependents to worry about. I have not even a wife, for I was never willing to exchange the loneliness of a bachelor for the loneliness of a husband. I can say in all sincerity that the prospect of death does not frighten me. Speculation about life beyond the grave has always bored me. Whatever it is, or is not, I'll try to get along. I have been so preoccupied about the sudden turn of my own affairs that I have neglected to make note of a most extraordinary incident. The pale man has done an astounding thing. He has skipped 3 rooms and moved all the way to number 203. We are now very close neighbors. We shall meet oftener, and my chances for making his acquaintance are now greater. I have confined myself to my bed during the last few days, and have had my food brought to me. I even called a local doctor, whom I suspect to be a quack. He looked me over with professional indifference and told me not to leave my room. For some reason, he does not want me to climb stairs. For this bit of information, he received a $10 bill which, as I directed him, he fished out of my coat pocket. A pickpocket could not have done it better. He had not been gone long when I was visited by the room clerk. That worthy suggested, with a great show of kindly concern, that I use the facilities of the local hospital. It was so modern and all that. With more firmness than I have been able to muster in a long time, I gave him to understand that I intended to remain where I am. Frowning sullenly, he stiffly retired. The doctor must have paused long enough downstairs to tell him a pretty story. It is obvious that he is afraid I shall die in his best room. The pale man is up to his old tricks. Last night, when I tottered down the hall, the door of number 202 was ajar. Without thinking, I looked inside. The pale man sat in a rocking chair, idly smoking a cigarette. He looked up into my eyes and smiled that peculiar, ambiguous smile that has so deeply puzzled me. I moved on down the corridor, not so much mystified as annoyed. The whole mystery of the man's conduct is beginning to irk me. It is all so inane, so utterly lacking in motive. I feel that I shall never meet the pale man, but at least I am going to learn his identity. Tomorrow I shall ask for the room clerk and deliberately interrogate him. I know now. I know the identity of the pale man, and I know the meaning of his smile. Early this afternoon, I summoned the room clerk to my bedside. "Please tell me," I asked abruptly, "who is the man in number 202? The clerk stared wearily and uncomprehendingly. "You must be mistaken. That room is unoccupied." "Oh, but it is," I snapped in irritation. "I myself saw the man there only 2 nights ago. He is a tall, handsome fellow with dark eyes and hair. He is unusually pale. He checked in the day that I arrived." The hotel man regarded me dubiously, as if I were trying to impose upon him. "But I assure you there is no such person in the house. As for his checking in when you did, you were the only guest we registered that day." "What? Why, I've seen him 20 times. First he had number 212 at the end of the corridor. Then he kept moving toward the front. Now he's next door in number 202. The room clerk threw up his hands. "You're crazy," he exclaimed, and I saw that he meant what he said. I shut up at once and dismissed him. After he had gone, I heard him rattling the knob of the pale man's door. There is no doubt that he believes the room to be empty. Thus it is that I can now understand the events of the past few weeks. I now comprehend the significance of the death in number 207. I even feel partly responsible for the old lady's passing. After all, I brought the pale man with me, but it was not I who fixed his path. Why he chose to approach me room after room through the length of this dreary hotel, why his path crossed the threshold of the woman in number 207, those mysteries I cannot explain. I suppose I should have guessed his identity when he skipped the 3 rooms the night I fell unconscious upon the floor. In a single night of triumph, he advanced until he was almost to my door. He will be coming by and by to inhabit this room. His ultimate goal, when he comes, I shall at least be able to return his smile of grim recognition. Meanwhile, I have only to wait beyond my bolted door. If you enjoyed listening today, be sure to subscribe to the channel by hitting the red subscribe button below. After doing so, click the bell icon next to the subscribe button to receive new content notifications. If you'd like to support our work and receive exclusive perks, consider becoming a channel member by clicking the join button below. To support us in other ways, see the video description for links to our Bandcamp and Patreon pages, our merch store over at Teespring, and further information relating to our releases on Audible, iTunes, and Spotify. And until next time,